May the words of my mouth and the meditations of all of our hearts bring us closer to the beloved community. It is a joy to be here with you today. It is an honor to be speaking today. Thank you, Reverends. I just realized this week that I've been teaching teenagers for 24 years. Yeah, this is sort of a whoa moment. Thank you. And I'm here to tell you, in my experience, that teenagers have feelings. Like a lot of feelings. And it's not a judgment, it's a beautiful thing. But there is something about adolescence that almost demands music to channel that overwhelm of feelings, right? So I ask you, what music did you listen to as a teenager when you had a lot of feelings? Take a moment to ponder. Oh, I'm hearing the whispers. This is good. Well, I used to lie down between two giant speakers. Do you remember when giant speakers were a thing? And like all teenagers, I listened to an album that had Mahler's Fifth Symphony and Shostakovich's Fifth Symphony. This is relatable? This is relatable. Okay. It's very cool. And I want to share a couple things. When I felt overwhelmed with love found or love lost, I would go to the greatest 11 minutes of peace I've heard anywhere, and it's the slow movement from the Mahler. So let's all put the big speakers right next to us and get swallowed up by this adagietto. Okay, I'm going to have to cut it off now, or we're going to take this through for 11 minutes. It is beautiful, right? Just. And sometimes I would have the opposite feeling when I felt like I was going to explode. And if you feel that, I cannot recommend this highly enough. The finale to Shostakovich Fifth Symphony. Let's take a listen. Get your earbuds out. Here we go. Feel angry yet? Good. You should. Good. Thank you. Thank you. This is where the violin part gets hard. All right. Music transported me in between those two speakers. It provided a vehicle for feelings that I wasn't yet old enough to name or process. And I suspect that you have songs that transport you as well. Music gives us a voice to the feelings that are beyond our thoughts. Music helps us praise, it helps us give thanks, it helps us love, rejoice, grieve, lament, or yes, rage. So if you take a functional MRI of a brain listening to or performing music, it lights up everywhere. Let's go to the tape. All those different centers processing, feeling, thought, pattern, right? Limbic system, everything is on fire there. You're probably familiar with those videos of folks whose brains have been ravaged by a degenerative neural disease, who still remember all the lyrics to their favorite hymns, because it's not stored in one part of the brain, it's stored everywhere. Thank you, Dave. Thank you, Adam. For each of us, there is music that is stored all throughout the brain. It's in our deepest embodied experiences. So for example, many of us not only know all the words to Silent Night right now, right here, but we can mentally still see the sanctuary of our childhood. We can still smell those candles. I can still hear my grandfather's voice, and he passed away 30 years ago. It's attached to that. Ooh, that's a feeling for me. Sorry, I didn't expect that. It's attached to our bodies, right? So even if some of us who sing that song don't currently believe that Jesus was the Messiah born of the Virgin Mary, which is the theological stance of that song, we still allow that song to transcend our theology. It becomes embedded in us. And I think that's a beautiful thing. We can contain multitudes. We can be complicated. We can have songs that we love even if we don't agree with every word anymore. I've been pondering as I changed careers why it is that I went into music back in those days. And I think it's because I liked how music felt. It feels great to be in a choir. When you get a chord in tune, when you dissolve into a unison, when you master that fugue, goosebumps. I think I went into music because I liked goosebumps. There are worse things to do, right? It feels like you're a part of the interdependent web of all things when you're in those sacred musical moments. And I guess that's it. I liked goosebumps. And most of the time, I think that's what we try and do in my choirs, at least. So it's for this background reason that I found myself arguing with a Lawrence student 6 or 7 years ago. She was taking the stance that all music is political. And I was not having that. I needed music to be me lying down between two speakers. So I came up with something very dismissive. It was probably like, quarter notes aren't conservative and major scales aren't liberal, right? I just wanted a space where I didn't have to think about debt ceilings and abortion bans and school shootings. Music as a refuge where I could just sit between those speakers and bring on the goosebumps. And music, I think, can do that. I think it does it beautifully. It can be a beautiful escape. I guess I was just never honest with myself about what I was escaping. So we're going to take a pivot in this sermon, and I just want to name in advance that this is going to be an uncomfortable pivot in some ways, and it's going to affect each of us in different ways depending on our locations and our identities. But I want you to just go with me. So we're going to start first with a musical test. I'm a professor. Here's your first exam. Okay. I'm going to start the first half of a musical sentence, and then you complete the sentence for me. Okay? This will be easy. For example, if I said, Camptown races, sing that song. Of course, 1 for 1. Okay, there's one more question. It's not any harder. Oh, Susanna, don't you cry for me. Perfect. Okay, raise your hand if you learned those songs as a kid. School, right? It's just in the water that we swim in. Okay. So I'm going to share some stuff with you that you can't unhear. Is probably the best way to put it. There's a colleague that I do a lot of like interest sessions with at music conferences, and he's super upbeat and super positive and like, today's going to be the best day of your life. And I'm always like the Eeyore at conferences, like giving you like the terrible news that you can't unhear. So I'm just going to lean into that. In ministry, we would call it prophetic truth-telling. Those songs, Camptown Races, Oh Susanna, they're typically labeled American folk songs, right? We all learn them in school, as we just established. They're in every like learning to play your instrument book. Right? My 5th grader has Camptown Races on his like trumpet methods for 5th graders. Those 2 songs were written by a very prolific and extremely successful American composer named Stephen Foster. He's a real person, right? So we're going to peel back some layers today. We're going to be vulnerable. And we should ask ourselves, well, who did Stephen Foster write these songs for? Was he just sitting in his house going, here's a good tune? No, it turns out he was writing them for an industry, right? And he was the composer for the Christie minstrel singers. Yes, okay, some of you are a step ahead of the rest of us here. This is where it gets really uncomfortable. And you're saying, what are minstrels? Well, we're referring to a practice in the 1830s through 1850s called blackface minstrelsy. This means white actors burning cork and making themselves to look black for a very racist form of entertainment. And they would do theatrical sketches and songs and dances and improvised comedy, and they would perform to huge audiences of white people. There were stock characters, sort of like a commedia dell'arte, like there's a couple characters that you'd always recognize. Jim Crow, for example, was a Southern black man. Zip Coon was a Northern black man. That's where Zippity Doodah comes from, right? And I don't want to go too far in this because I'm starting to see you catch up to where I'm going with this. Let me be clear, this was a deeply, like the definition of racist kind of a project. It was white people pretending to be black to make horribly racist characters of black people. And so then we go, well, why would that even exist, right? The political project of minstrelsy, I think, was to assuage Northern white audiences that slavery was fine. Slavery was good. In fact, it was better this way, right? And so people would pay every weekend to see these same shows. You can, if you have the stomach for it, and I genuinely mean if you have the stomach for it, Google the original lyrics to those songs. But let me just tell you now, and your brain's probably catching up, you're not going to like the lyrics that you find there. And it's not just those two songs, Camptown Races, Oh Susanna, the Glendy Burke, Old Dan Tucker. Yeah, the Old Dan Tucker that everybody learns, right? Chingering Chaw, the Boatman Dance, Bile Them Cabbage, Swanee River, Polly Wolly Doodle. There's a whole list of songs that were bangers of their time in the 1830s and 40s. And you will not like the lyrics to the original songs. And I'm genuinely sorry. As I said, I'm sorry to break this news to you, but if you didn't know, now you know. And it should fill you with some questions. Here's a couple. Why did they teach us these songs? Why on earth do we all know these songs? It's not like that's the only music ever written in the history of music. Why were these songs selected? And then follow up, why did no one ever tell us this? We have a Stephen Foster Elementary in our town, right? Why did no one ever mention to us that this is what that was about? I'm telling you, as a professor of choral music, that I did not know until 6 years ago. I sang them in grade school. I sang them in middle school. I sang them in high school. This is like a Dr. Seuss. I sang them in college. I sang them in grad school. I sang them with professional choirs. I taught them to grade schoolers. I taught them to middle school, right? It was just the water we swam in. I didn't know, but now I know. It's actually, and this is my point, amazing when you think about it, that no one talked about it. That's what I'm trying to say. It's not like music doesn't get talked about with context. You want to talk about Johann Sebastian Bach? We can fill this sanctuary with context about Bach. There has been so much written in so many languages about Bach's music. We can talk about whether he used a harpsichord or an organ, on which Sunday, with which church that he worked in. We can tell you how many boys were in his choir on any given Sunday. It's not like we don't have an interest in the context of music. Which leads us to wonder, well, then how do we know nothing about these songs that we all sing? At some point, people must have decided, let's not talk about this. At some point, people must have decided, let's not talk about this anymore. And so they whitewashed it, and we bought it. And we didn't even know that we were buying it. It just showed up on our 4th grade, So You're Learning to Play Flute book. Just like we collectively willed ourselves to forget about Tulsa Black Wall Street Massacre or the Tuskegee syphilis experiments. There's a term for this when we will ourselves to not know. And I first encountered it from Charles Mills' book, The Racial Contract. Mills is a black philosopher who says that white people collectively, I don't mean like we all had a meeting, I just mean collectively, white people will themselves into ignorance about the world that they've created. And they engage in what he calls, quote, an epistemology of ignorance. What he means is we adopt a way of thinking that encourages not knowing. And that way is socially beneficial. Like in the Matrix, it's easier to just be in the Matrix than to take the pill and realize that there's a Matrix, if you've seen that movie. So rather than seeing that slavery is horrific in the 1840s and 50s, those white audiences willed themselves into believing that it's entertaining. Rather than seeing the legacy of slavery in artifacts like minstrelsy songs, we just relabeled them American songs. So to my students 7 years ago, yes, music can be political. You were right. And I personally don't like feeling with that. I don't like to sit with that feeling. It's uncomfortable. It's an uncomfortable feeling to sit with that. And I know that I should be sitting with patience and curiosity, but normally we want to just offload that feeling. So we might want to say, well, you know, everyone was racist in the 1840s. You and I know that's not true. We know there were white abolitionists. Those are our spiritual ancestors, right? We know that Frederick Douglass wrote a scathing review of blackface minstrelsy in 1848. I can quote it for you. So to his credit, when we're talking about artists and art, Stephen Foster had spent his whole life in Pittsburgh. And when we got married and he and his wife went down to a honeymoon in New Orleans, and so he actually saw slavery, he stopped writing blackface minstrelsy songs. He went, nope, and he started writing parlor songs, like I Dream of Jeannie, right? Not the TV show, though. So this, for me, is not a sermon where I want you to go home and cancel Stephen Foster. I'm actually grateful to have learned that there was a music industry devoted to racism, because it helps me to understand how so many people bought into that project for so long. Let me say that again. It helps me to understand how so many people who went to church every day and recycled and did all the things that they, well, maybe they didn't recycle, but did all the things that they thought they were supposed to do, also went to bed at night comfortable with enslavement. It helps me to understand that. And it calls me to look and take notice of all the ways in which I might be burying my head today in the sand. So if we have the courage to peel back some layers in music, we can begin to see how easy it is to want the fruits of music without attending to the trees from which the fruit grows. I'm going to say that again. It's easy to want the fruits of music without talking about the tree or the soil from which that fruit came. So while I'm on an uncomfortable conversation, let's talk about spirituals from African American enslavement. If you sang in choir, you probably sang these. Didn't my Lord deliver Daniel? Elijah rocked. Soon I'll be done with the troubles of the world. Ezekiel saw the wheel. These were taught to us all as staples of the choral tradition. You probably sang them at the end of the concert as the finale, the one that guarantees the standing ovation. I was in a choir festival, where you gather 6 high schools together and they bring in a conductor to work with them. So it was me and another conductor, and he was working with one group and I was working with the other. So they had done, Bach, and they had done some contemporary stuff. And then he says, and this is a verbatim quote, "Now that we've gotten through the meat and potatoes, let's get to the dessert." And then they did like a jazzy arrangement of a slave spiritual. And I'm thinking to myself, what a perfect crystallization of that epistemology of ignorance. Songs from enslavement as a dessert, as something sweet. And it was so normal to think of that 10, 12 years ago, that he felt comfortable saying that to 1,000 people and not going, oh, I'm going to get some pushback for this. It was just how one swam in those waters. I tried to talk about all this in longer than 17 minutes in a book I wrote a few years ago. And one of the most common misunderstandings from my writing is that I, Steve Sieck, want to cancel the singing of slave spirituals. And so the first thing I always say is, there's not a council that meets, votes on which songs get sung and don't get sung. And then, and if there was a council, I'm not on it. Rather, all I ask in the book is that for white folks to become curious about why they want to sing the song, not about who gets to sing the song. That's the wrong question. It's an interesting question, but I think that we get lost in that question. My question is, what is your motivation for singing the song? What is your relationship to this song? Does it change your desire to sing it as the closer because it gives you goosebumps? I'm saying that I participated in a process for years where the artistic fruit from the tree of slavery was something that we did without any reflection. So all I ask my white readers in that book to do is hold the gravity of the song for just a minute before you decide. And if that holding produces the feeling that we're all feeling, that anxiety, the fragility, that shame, that anger, all those system overwhelmed feelings, take another breath, sit longer. It might help to think in different contexts, noting that every context is its own thing, right? So here's a question. How would you sing music that emerged from the concentration camps? How would you sing the songs of resistance from apartheid? There will always be amazing and powerful and beautiful songs that emerge from horror, because singing is one of the ways that people get themselves through. When we break out of the epistemology of ignorance, we take on music in all of its rich complexity. Okay, it's heavy. I recognize probably not a good first sermon to give in a new space. See if I can bring us back here now. I'm arguing that music always has a context. Music always has a context. And sometimes you can decide not to talk about Bruno, but it doesn't always work out. Some contexts can be horrible, and I've just gone through maybe 2 of the worst in history. But some contexts can be inspiring. Now that Mahler symphony, Mahler was a clinically overworked conductor and composer. He was conducting all the major orchestras of the world, which is a full-time job, and also composing symphonies, right? Which is also a full-time job. And he was an early 20th century Austrian Jew, and this is a bad social location to be, right? Who was constantly facing oppression. That he, someone who died of exhaustion, could write the most exquisite music of serenity that I've ever heard, given that context, makes it all the more heartbreaking and astounding that he could write a world that he didn't live in. Or consider Shostakovich's symphony, which to me is the most exquisite musical middle finger ever given to a system. Shostakovich was a mid-20th century Soviet composer. And the Soviet authorities had strong opinions about what you could and couldn't write, and they never ceased in letting Dmitri Shostakovich know where he stood on that. You can't write a letter to Khrushchev saying, artistic liberty, right? That's a good way to go to Siberia. So he wrote that symphony, and everyone who has ears to hear knows what he's saying in it. Where are we left with this? Music has a magical capacity to weave together our feelings, our experiences, our histories, our cultures, our ways of understanding the world. It lights up the whole brain. Music is not merely political, it's actually part of the fabric of our being. And I think sometimes that's beautiful. Silent Night will always move me the way it did when I was 5. Sometimes it is genuinely horrifying. And to be honest, just to lighten the mood a little bit, and I'm telling you as a professor of music, most songs throughout history have to do with drinking with your friends or sleeping with a lover. Really? You can find like 11th century manuscripts and it's like how to get drunk and how to sleep with someone. As many as it takes. Yeah, you'll ponder that one for a good long while. It took me a long time to realize that I wanted music to be a refuge from the world I inhabit. But the truth is that music is ever of our world. And this world, it's beautiful, it's horrifying, it can be mundane, it can be amazing. And so it's filled with beautiful, horrifying, mundane, and amazing songs. So we hold fast to our commitment for a free and responsible search for truth and meaning. Let us open our eyes, our hearts, our ears, and our throats. Let us sing our living tradition. May it be so, and amen. We're going to do something slightly different for the special music. I was unable to bring in the Robert Shaw chorale. So, or the Dale Warland singers. I'm going to do something that annoys me as a musician. I'm going to be talking to you during the music. If you love the music and want to hear it without me talking, I can just send you a link to the song. So we're going to listen to this and I'm going to offer some questions. And what's going to happen as we're listening is we're just going to peel back more and more layers to see all the things that are in the song. Here we go. As we listen, when do you think this was written? Where do you imagine this being sung? This is the first of a 5-part musical setting for a Catholic Mass. This is the Kyrie eleison, which means Lord have mercy, Christ have mercy, Lord have mercy. This is where the layers get interesting. This work was written by a composer named Franck Martin, who is a Swiss composer. His father was a Calvinist minister. Franck Martin was Calvinist. If you know anything about those two traditions, why would a Calvinist write a Catholic Mass? This was written, this particular movement, in 1921. Just a brief survey of contemporary classical music. That's not what most music in 1921 sounded like. Think Rite of Spring, think Fantasia, all the music from there. Why would someone in 1921 who wasn't Catholic write this ancient-sounding Catholic Mass? Martin finished the last movement in 1926 and then shoved it in a drawer, locked that drawer, and the piece didn't come out until the 1970s. He refused to publish it or to have anyone know about it, let alone perform it. When asked by the conductor Paul Zacher, "Why aren't you doing this Mass?" he said, "I wanted it to be a conversation between me and God. I didn't want anyone to know that it was mine." How does that change you? For historical context, Martin was 24 when World War I broke out, which was the most devastating and traumatic war that Europe had ever seen. He started this Mass just a few years after the war ended. Lord have mercy. Let's let the rest of the music speak for itself.